The morning sun beat down on the Fort Benning firing range with a merciless intensity, turning the Georgia air into a thick blanket that seemed to muffle sound itself. 500 yards downrange, five targets stood in silent challenge, human-shaped silhouettes barely visible through the heat waves rising from the parched earth. Staff Sergeant Amanda Reeves lay prone on the firing platform, her breathing slow, and measured her finger hovering with practiced discipline just outside the trigger guard of her custom-built M40A6 sniper rifle. Behind her, 20 fresh-faced recruits watched in skeptical silence. Several exchanged knowing glances, the kind reserved for moments when superiors make claims the young men were certain couldn't be backed up. Especially when that superior was a woman in her mid-30s, claiming she could put 5 consecutive rounds into targets at distances where most of them could barely make out the silhouettes. Amanda ignored them. She'd been ignoring those looks for 8 years in the Army. Instead, she focused on the minute adjustments to her Schmidt and Bender PM22 scope, accounting for the 7 MPR crosswind that threatened to push her 175-grain bullets off course. Her rifle was a masterpiece of precision engineering with a Remington 700 action custom-threaded barrel and a stock she'd personally modified to fit her frame perfectly. Staff Sergeant Reeves will now demonstrate proper long-range target acquisition and engagement, announced Captain Reynolds, the supervising officer. Pay attention, gentlemen. What you're about to see is the difference between someone who shoots a rifle and an actual shooter. Amanda drew in a breath, held it at the natural respiratory pause, and squeezed, not pulled the trigger with the pad of her index finger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, the crack of the shot echoing across the range. Through her scope, she watched as the first target's center mass erupted with a puff of dust. Without hurry, she chambered the next round and repeated the process. 4 more times. 5 shots, 5 hits, all within a 3-inch grouping. Textbook precision. When she rose from the platform, dusting the Georgia clay from her uniform, the silence from the recruits had transformed from skepticism to something approaching awe. Only then did Amanda allow herself the faintest smile, not of pride, but of recognition that perhaps 1 or 2 of these young men might reconsider what they thought they knew about female soldiers in combat roles. That gentleman, Captain Reynolds said, is why Staff Sergeant Reeves was selected for Delta Force's Specialized Sniper Unit during her second tour in Afghanistan. He paused, allowing the weight of that statement to sink in. She's not teaching you because of some diversity initiative. She's teaching you because she's put more confirmed hostiles in the ground than anyone else currently stationed at this base. As the recruits dispersed toward their assigned positions, Amanda caught fragments of their whispered conversations. Heard she got the Bronze Star for 37 confirmed in the Korengal Valley alone. My brother was in her unit in Fallujah, said she's the real. All familiar patterns, the initial doubt, the demonstration, the reluctant respect. It had been the rhythm of her entire military career from West Point to the present day. Every new assignment, every new group of soldiers, every new commander, always the same dance of prove yourself again. At 34, Amanda Reeves had long since stopped needing external validation. The 8 years since her graduation from the United States Military Academy had been spent building a reputation that spoke for itself: 2 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, distinguished marksman badges, and a combat record that commanding officers studied. She had been one of the first women to complete the grueling Ranger training after combat roles opened to females, finishing in the top 5% of her class despite the open hostility from many of her male counterparts. But today wasn't about her record or her credentials. It was about preparing these young men for the realities they might soon face, realities she had already lived through. Johnson, she barked at a lanky recruit who was mishandling his rifle. That weapon isn't a girlfriend you're trying to impress. It's a precision instrument. Treat it accordingly. The young man straightened immediately, his face flushing red as he corrected his grip. Around him, the other recruits suddenly found renewed focus in their own weapons. Better, Amanda said, her voice softening just enough to be encouraging without undermining her authority. Remember, gentlemen in the field, your life and the lives of your team depend on these fundamentals. There are no second chances out there. As the morning training session progressed, Amanda moved among the recruits, making corrections to their stances, their breathing patterns, their trigger discipline. For most instructors, this was routine duty. For Amanda, it was personal. Every life she might save through proper training was a form of redemption, a payment toward a debt she'd been carrying since childhood. The first time Amanda Reeves held a rifle, she was 12 years old, standing in the backwoods of her family's Montana property. The weapon, an M24 sniper weapons system that her father had somehow liberated from military inventory, was almost comically oversized in her small hands. But James Reeves, former Delta Force operator and veteran of Desert Storm, hadn't seen anything humorous about the moment. "This isn't a toy, Amanda," he'd said, his voice carrying the same gravitas it had when he addressed his men in combat. "This is a responsibility, a commitment to excellence. You're going to learn to do this right, or you're not going to do it at all." For hours that day and for countless weekends afterward, James had drilled his daughter on the fundamentals: proper breathing, trigger control, understanding ballistics, reading wind conditions. He never raised his voice, never showed impatience. But there was an intensity in his instruction that even a 12-year-old could recognize as something beyond normal fatherly teaching. It wasn't until years later that Amanda understood the deeper currents beneath those lessons. Her father had returned from Iraq a changed man, physically intact, but carrying invisible wounds that manifested in night terrors, in sudden thousand-yard stares, during family dinners, in the growing collection of whiskey bottles hidden in his workshop. The official story was that Colonel James Reeves had suffered a stress reaction to combat conditions. The truth, which Amanda pieced together from overheard late-night conversations and redacted VA medical reports, was far more complex. Her father's special operations team had been betrayed during a classified mission in 1991. The resulting ambush had left half his men dead, and James himself with the burden of having survived when others hadn't. The Army had given him medals for his heroism that day. What they hadn't given him was peace. "The most important weapon isn't the rifle," he'd told Amanda during those early lessons. "It's what's behind it: your mind, your judgment, your ability to know when to take the shot and when not to." Those words had shaped Amanda's approach to her military career more than any official training manual. They had guided her through West Point, through the grueling selection processes for special operations, through the moral complexities of 4 combat tours. Now, as she watched these young recruits struggle with the basic principles of marksmanship, she wondered how many of them would truly understand that lesson before they found themselves in situations where it mattered most. The afternoon sun had reached its zenith when Colonel Marcus Sullivan arrived at the firing range. At 67, Sullivan moved with the deliberate economy of a man who had spent decades honing his body into a precision instrument and now maintained it with the same care one might give an antique firearm, respectful of its age but unwilling to concede to it. His appearance on the range caused an immediate ripple of tension. Unlike many retired officers who occasionally visited Fort Benning, Sullivan wasn't there for ceremony or nostalgia. As the former commander of SEAL Team 6 during the later years of the Cold War, his presence carried an almost mythic weight. The stories about him, some verified, others apocryphal, were passed among special operators, like modern folklore. How he'd infiltrated East Berlin in 1987 to extract a defecting Russian scientist. How he'd commanded the classified Operation Phantom Fury years before the public ever heard about it. How he'd once gone 3 days without sleep during a hostage situation in Lebanon, refusing to leave the Tactical Operations Center until every American was accounted for. But what made Sullivan truly exceptional in military circles wasn't his combat record, impressive though it was. It was his reputation as a kingmaker. Officers and enlisted personnel who earned Sullivan's approval tended to advance rapidly. Those who didn't often found their careers stagnating for reasons that never quite made it into official performance reviews. Amanda straightened as Sullivan approached, offering a crisp salute that the older man returned with equal precision. "Impressive work with these recruits, Staff Sergeant," Sullivan said, his voice a graveled baritone shaped by decades of command and unfiltered Marlboros. "Captain Reynolds tells me their marksmanship scores have improved 30% since you took over the training module." "Thank you, sir," Amanda replied, maintaining her professional demeanor despite their long-standing relationship. Sullivan had been her father's commanding officer during several classified operations and had taken a personal interest in her career since her days at West Point. But neither of them ever acknowledged that connection in professional settings. Sullivan surveyed the range, his pale blue eyes still sharp despite the deep creases that surrounded them, taking in every detail of the training setup. "I see you're using the modified qualification course I suggested," he noted with approval. The added stress factors should better prepare them for actual combat conditions. Amanda nodded. Yes, sir, particularly the communication requirements during target acquisition. Most of these recruits can shoot reasonably well in ideal conditions, but they fall apart when required to maintain situational awareness while doing so. Sullivan's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile on a more expressive man. It's not the rifle that makes the shooter, he said. It's the mind behind the trigger, Amanda finished automatically. This time Sullivan did smile, though the expression barely disturbed his weathered features. Your father's words. Yes, sir. Wise man James Reeves, Sullivan said. One of the finest soldiers I ever commanded. How is he these days? The question carried more weight than its casual phrasing suggested. Both of them knew that the once legendary Colonel Reeves now spent his days in self-imposed isolation in a cabin outside Bozeman, his only regular contact being his weekly therapy sessions at the VA and Amanda's monthly visits. Stable, Amanda answered, choosing her words carefully. The new medication seems to be helping with the night terrors. Sullivan nodded, accepting the euphemism for what it was. PTSD wasn't openly discussed among their generation of warriors, especially for men of her father's era. It was treated as a private battle, one fought in silence, in shadow, away from the scrutiny of those who hadn't experienced the causes firsthand. I've been meaning to get out there to see him, Sullivan said, the hint of genuine regret in his voice, suggesting he knew this was unlikely to happen. Maybe after this new command situation settles. The mention of the command situation caused Amanda's jaw to tighten imperceptibly. 3 weeks earlier, Brigadier General William Blackwood had assumed command of Fort Benning's Principal Training Division, a political appointment that had raised eyebrows throughout the chain of command. Sullivan, ever observant, caught her reaction. I take it you've had the pleasure of meeting our new commanding officer? Briefly during the change of command ceremony, sir. And your impression? Amanda hesitated. Military protocol discouraged speaking critically of superior officers, particularly to someone of Sullivan's stature. But Sullivan had always valued candor over decorum in private conversations. Permission to speak freely, sir. Always Staff Sergeant. Amanda chose her words with precision. General Blackwood seems to have a very traditional perspective on military structure and discipline. That's the most diplomatic description of William Blackwood I've heard in 30 years of knowing the man. Sullivan said, a hint of dry amusement coloring his tone. And entirely accurate as far as it goes. He glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard, then continued in a lower voice. Blackwood and I came up through the system together. He's old school in all the ways that matter and all the ways that don't. Graduated from West Point with honors, family legacy, stretching back to the Civil War. His father was a 2-star who made his bones during the Gulf War. Sullivan's expression darkened slightly. Blackwood himself has spent most of his career navigating Pentagon politics rather than actual battlefields. He's a connected man, senators, defense contractors, old money families. The kind of officer who gets promoted because of who he knows, not what he's accomplished. The unspoken warning was clear. Amanda had encountered officers like Blackwood throughout her career, men who viewed the increasing role of women in combat positions as an affront to military tradition rather than an expansion of available talent. I appreciate the context, sir, Amanda said carefully. Sullivan studied her for a long moment. James saved my life in Al-Basra in '91. Did he ever tell you that? The abrupt change of subject caught Amanda off guard. No, sir, he doesn't talk much about his deployment. Typical James, Sullivan said with a faint smile. Always did let his actions speak instead. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. I made him a promise that day, as we were waiting for exfil under heavy fire. Told him if anything ever happened to him, I'd look after his family. At the time, I was thinking about financial support, maybe college recommendations for his young daughter. His gaze, suddenly intense, locked with Amanda's. Never thought I'd end up watching that daughter become one of the finest soldiers I've ever seen. But here we are. Before Amanda could respond to the unexpected compliment, Sullivan continued, his voice dropping even lower. Blackwood was there too, you know. In Al-Basra, different unit, different mission objective, but operating in the same AO. A shadow passed across the older man's face. There's history there that doesn't appear in any official report. History your father carries with him every day. The revelation landed like a physical blow. Amanda had never known that Blackwood had any connection to her father's last mission, the classified operation that had sent him home with a Purple Heart, a chest full of medals, and nightmares that still plagued him decades later. Sir, are you saying that General Blackwood was somehow involved in... Sullivan cut her off with a subtle gesture as Captain Reynolds approached from across the range. Colonel Sullivan, Reynolds called out, General Blackwood is requesting your presence at the command briefing. His aide said it's urgent. Sullivan nodded acknowledgement to the captain before turning back to Amanda. We'll continue this conversation another time, Staff Sergeant. He lowered his voice to add, watch yourself around Blackwood. He has a long memory and very particular views about a soldier's proper place, especially female soldiers. With that cryptic warning, Sullivan departed, leaving Amanda with far more questions than answers and an uneasy feeling that had nothing to do with the Georgia heat. By sunset, Amanda had concluded the day's training and was reviewing performance metrics in the small office she shared with two other instructors. The space was utilitarian in the extreme government-issue furniture fluorescent lighting that gave everything a sickly pallor and walls decorated only with required safety notices and training schedules. A soft knock at the open door drew her attention from the paperwork. Bianca Thompson, one of the administrative specialists from the command office, stood in the doorway with an expression that suggested she was delivering unwelcome news. Staff Sergeant Reeves, Colonel Harrington wants to see you in his office. Thompson hesitated, then added quietly, General Blackwood will be there too. Amanda maintained a neutral expression despite the sudden tightening in her chest. Thank you, Specialist. Did the Colonel say what this is regarding? No, ma'am, just that it's urgent and confidential. After Thompson departed, Amanda took a moment to ensure her uniform was impeccable, a habit instilled by her father long before she'd entered West Point. Whatever this meeting entailed, she would face it with the professionalism and composure expected of an elite soldier. The walk to Colonel Harrington's office took Amanda through the heart of Fort Benning's administrative complex, a labyrinth of corridors filled with the controlled chaos of military bureaucracy. Junior officers hurried past with stacks of paperwork, senior NCOs engaged in hushed conversations outside meeting rooms. Civilian contractors navigated the space with the slightly lost expressions of outsiders in a world governed by rules they only partially understood. As she approached the colonel's office, Amanda noted the unusual presence of two MPs standing at parade rest outside the door, a formality typically reserved for high-level meetings or disciplinary actions. Neither was a reassuring possibility. Staff Sergeant Amanda Reeves reporting as ordered, sir, she announced after being admitted by the colonel's aide. Colonel Harrington, a career officer in his 50s with a combat record that had earned him universal respect, stood as she entered. Behind his desk, occupying a leather chair, with the casual entitlement of a man accustomed to deference, sat Brigadier General William Blackwood. At 58, Blackwood embodied the physical archetype of an old-school general officer. 6 feet tall with broad shoulders, silver gray hair, cropped in a traditional military cut, and a bearing that suggested he expected his mere presence to command respect. His uniform, adorned with rows of ribbons and badges, told the story of a man who had served during multiple conflicts, but as Sullivan had implied, had experienced most of them from command centers rather than combat zones. Staff Sergeant Reeves, Harrington said, his tone formal, but not unfriendly. Thank you for coming so promptly. Please have a seat. Amanda sat at attention, her spine not touching the chair's back, her eyes fixed at a point just above the colonel's head, the posture of a soldier prepared for inspection or reprimand. At ease, Staff Sergeant, Harrington said. This isn't a disciplinary meeting. Not yet, Blackwood interjected, speaking for the first time. His voice carried the refined accent of old money and expensive education, what enlisted personnel often called academy polish. He studied Amanda with the clinical detachment of someone evaluating a piece of equipment rather than addressing a fellow soldier. Staff Sergeant Reeves, Blackwood continued, Colonel Harrington tells me you've been running the advanced marksmanship program for our new infantry recruits. An unusual assignment for someone of your background. The slight pause before background carried unmistakable meaning. Amanda maintained her professional demeanor, refusing to rise to the bait. I've been instructing for 6 months, sir. The program has shown significant improvements in qualification rates. So I've heard, Blackwood said, his tone suggesting this achievement was somehow suspect. I've also heard that you've implemented several unauthorized modifications to the standard training protocols. Amanda felt a flicker of concern, but kept her expression neutral. Sir, all modifications were submitted through proper channels and approved by Colonel Harrington and Major Stevens from the Training Development Directorate. Harrington nodded confirmation. Everything was done by the book, General. Staff Sergeant Reeves has been exemplary in following procedural requirements. Blackwood waved this away as if swatting an irritating insect. Procedures can be followed to the letter while still undermining the spirit of the training mission, Colonel. He fixed his gaze on Amanda. I've reviewed your personnel file, Staff Sergeant. Quite the remarkable career trajectory. West Point graduate ranger qualified, multiple combat tours, special operations experience. One might almost call it extraordinary. The way he emphasized the last word made it clear he didn't mean it as a compliment. Thank you, sir. Amanda replied, her tone carefully modulated. It wasn't praise, Staff Sergeant, Blackwood said bluntly. It was an observation that your career has benefited substantially from the military's recent social experiments. Colonel Harrington shifted uncomfortably in his chair. General, I must point out that Staff Sergeant Reeves's record speaks for itself. Her combat effectiveness metrics are among the highest in the division. Are they, Blackwood raised an eyebrow, or are they the product of lowered standards and preferential treatment? The Pentagon's desperation to showcase success stories for their diversity initiatives has created some interesting statistical anomalies. The implication was clear and deeply offensive that Amanda's accomplishments were somehow the result of favoritism rather than merit. It took every ounce of her discipline not to respond with the anger that flared hot beneath her professional veneer. Instead, she said evenly, General, I've met every standard established for male soldiers in identical roles. In some cases, I've exceeded those standards. And yet, Blackwood continued as if she hadn't spoken, here you are teaching basic marksmanship to recruits instead of deployed with a combat unit. Curious assignment for someone with your supposedly exceptional capabilities. Before Amanda could respond, Blackwood turned to Harrington. Colonel, I'm implementing immediate changes to the training structure. Staff Sergeant Reeves will be reassigned to administrative duties effective tomorrow. I'm bringing in Master Sergeant Dennison from Quantico to take over the marksmanship program. Harrington's surprise was evident. Sir, with all due respect, changing instructors mid-cycle will disrupt the training progression. The recruits have established rapport with Staff Sergeant Reeves and their performance metrics are trending positively. My decision is final, Colonel, Blackwood said, his tone brooking no argument. The fundamentals of combat marksmanship should be taught by combat veterans with proven field experience, not, he paused, his gaze sliding dismissively over Amanda, trophy appointments. The insult was so blatant that even Harrington seemed taken aback. General, I must object to that characterization. Staff Sergeant Reeves's combat record is not the topic of discussion, Blackwood interrupted. This is about maintaining training standards during my command. I will not have Fort Benning become a showcase for political correctness at the expense of combat readiness. Amanda sat perfectly still, her face an unreadable mask that concealed the calculations running behind it. This wasn't simply about training protocols or instructor assignments. This was Blackwood establishing dominance, sending a message about his command philosophy, and perhaps if Sullivan's cryptic warning had merit, settling some old score that predated her military service. There's another matter we need to address, Blackwood continued, pulling a folder from his briefcase. Staff Sergeant, you're currently supervising a special training unit that includes Private First Class Sophie Miller, correct? Yes, sir, Amanda confirmed, wondering where this new line of questioning was leading. Private Miller is part of my marksmanship enhancement cohort. She's showing considerable potential as a designated marksman. Blackwood's expression soured. Private Miller should never have been assigned to that program. Her qualifying scores were borderline at best. I've reviewed her file as well, another example of standards being relaxed to accommodate social engineering in our ranks. Sir, Amanda said carefully, Private Miller qualified in the 92nd percentile on her initial marksmanship assessment. That's well above the threshold for the enhancement program. According to your modified standards, perhaps, Blackwood countered. Effective immediately, Private Miller is being reassigned to logistics support. Her temperament and physical capabilities are better suited to administrative roles. The injustice of this decision struck Amanda like a physical blow. Sophie Miller was a 19-year-old recruit from Ohio who had joined the Army to help pay for college. Despite her youth and small stature, she had demonstrated natural shooting abilities that with proper training could develop into exceptional skill. Relegating her to a logistics role solely because of Blackwood's apparent bias against female soldiers in combat roles was not just unfair, it was detrimental to the Army's mission of fielding the most qualified personnel regardless of gender. General, Amanda said, choosing her words with extreme care, Private Miller has demonstrated exceptional aptitude. During last night's night fire exercise, she achieved the highest accuracy rating in the entire training group. Removing her from the program would waste valuable talent that the Army has already invested resources in developing. Blackwood's expression hardened. Are you questioning my orders, Staff Sergeant? No, sir, Amanda replied steadily. I'm providing relevant performance data that may not have been included in your briefing materials. Colonel Harrington intervened clearly, attempting to diffuse the growing tension. General, perhaps we could implement these changes after the current training cycle concludes. That would allow for a smoother transition and prevent disruption to the established learning progression. Blackwood considered this for a moment, then nodded curtly. Very well, Colonel. Staff Sergeant Reeves may complete the current week's training schedule. Master Sergeant Dennison will assume control of the program on Monday. He fixed Amanda with a cold stare. Consider this a direct order, Staff Sergeant. No deviations from the standard training protocols for the remainder of your assignment. Any modifications, however minor, will be considered insubordination. Is that understood? Perfectly, sir, Amanda responded, maintaining eye contact despite the urge to look away from the contempt evident in Blackwood's gaze. Dismissed. As Amanda left the office, her mind was already racing through the implications of this encounter. Blackwood's hostility seemed personal in a way that transcended the usual resistance some male officers showed toward female soldiers in combat roles. Sullivan's cryptic comments about her father's last mission and Blackwood's involvement suddenly took on new significance. Something deeper was at play. Something connected to the classified operation in 1991 that had broken her father and sent ripples through the special operations community that apparently continued to this day. Amanda needed to understand what that connection was, not just for her own career's sake, but because instinct told her that Blackwood's vendetta wouldn't stop with a simple reassignment. As she walked back to the barracks in the gathering dusk, Amanda made a decision. After lights out, she would access the base's secure archives. If there was a connection between her father Blackwood and the mission that had haunted her family for decades, she would find it regardless of the risk to her career or the classified nature of the information. Some truths were worth the consequences of discovering them. The secure archives section of Fort Benning's administration building was nominally accessible to personnel with Amanda's security clearance, though visits after regular hours required special authorization. Fortunately, Master Sergeant Rivera, who managed the night security detail, had served with Amanda in Afghanistan and owed her a favor after she'd pulled him out of a collapsed building during an operation in Kandahar. 20 minutes, Staff Sergeant, Rivera said quietly as he used his access card to admit her to the climate-controlled room that housed physical records too sensitive for digital storage. The camera feed loops for system maintenance at Dura 200. That's your window. Appreciated, Top, Amanda replied, using the respectful nickname for the senior non-commissioned officer. I'll be quick. The archives room smelled of paper and the faint metallic tang of the fire suppression system. Row upon row of locking cabinets contained decades of operation reports, after-action reviews, and personnel files deemed too sensitive for the regular records section. Amanda moved directly to the section marked CENTCOM OPS 1990-1995, Central Command Operations, covering the Gulf War period and its immediate aftermath. Working methodically, she located the files related to special operations in the immediate post-war period. Most were heavily redacted with entire pages obscured by black marker or completely removed. But Amanda wasn't looking for operational details. She was searching for the personnel rosters, the command structures, anything that might connect her father and Blackwood during that critical period. In a folder labeled Task Force Raptor, Al-Basra Sector, she finally found what she was looking for. The mission brief was mostly redacted, but the command structure was clear: Colonel Marcus Sullivan commanding, Major James Reeves, second in command. And there, listed as the liaison officer from a parallel operation, was Captain William Blackwood. Amanda's pulse quickened as she flipped through the sparse documentation, searching for any clues about what had actually transpired. Most of the after-action report was blacked out, but a single paragraph near the end had survived the censor's pen. Mission compromise occurred at grid coordinate, redacted. Evidence suggests advanced intelligence of insertion was available to hostile forces. Casualty rate of 47% sustained before extraction. Recommendation: full investigation into potential security breach at command level. The next page contained a follow-up note dated 3 months later. Investigation concluded. No evidence of intelligence compromise found. Casualties attributed to unexpected enemy presence in sector. Case closed by order of redacted. Amanda felt a chill that had nothing to do with the archive room's temperature control. The terse bureaucratic language couldn't disguise the story beneath. Something had gone catastrophically wrong during that mission. Someone had known the special operations team was coming, and somehow the subsequent investigation had been shut down. A separate personnel note in her father's file, dated 2 weeks after the mission, told the rest of the story. Major James Reeves requesting immediate transfer to training command. Reason: personal hardship. Note: psychiatric evaluation pending. Combat stress reaction diagnosed. Recommendation: approved transfer. Medical retirement likely within 24 months. That had been the beginning of her father's downward spiral, the classified mission that had broken a legendary special operator and eventually driven him to isolation in the Montana wilderness. As Amanda carefully replaced the files, making sure to leave everything exactly as she had found it, another folder caught her eye, one labeled simply, Fallujah Incident Review, 2004. Blackwood's name was visible on the cover sheet. With a quick glance at her watch, 7 minutes remaining in her window, Amanda pulled the folder and quickly scanned its contents. What she found made her blood run cold. In 2004, then, Colonel Blackwood had commanded a battalion during operations in Fallujah, Iraq. After a particularly devastating IED attack had killed 7 American soldiers, Blackwood had ordered a retaliatory strike against what intelligence had identified as an insurgent safe house. The strike had gone forward despite last-minute intelligence suggesting the target might actually be a civilian residence. The resulting operation had killed 16 Iraqi civilians, including 9 children. The official investigation had initially pointed to serious command failures and recommended formal charges against Blackwood for ignoring updated intelligence. But the final page of the report contained a stunning revision. Upon further review, responsibility for intelligence failure rests with redacted. Colonel Blackwood acted appropriately based on information available at time of decision. Recommend no further action against commanding officer. Note: Lieutenant, redacted, posthumously reprimanded for intelligence gathering failures. Amanda stared at the document in disbelief. Blackwood had authorized a strike that killed civilians, then somehow managed to shift the blame to a dead officer who couldn't defend himself. And he had been promoted to brigadier general afterward. The implications were staggering. Not only had Blackwood potentially been involved in whatever had gone wrong during her father's final mission, but he had a documented history of evading responsibility for his command failures that had resulted in the deaths of both Americans and civilians. This wasn't just about Blackwood's bias against female soldiers or his old-school military politics. This was about a pattern of moral failure that had been covered up, allowing a deeply flawed officer to rise to a position of significant power within the military hierarchy. As Amanda carefully returned the Fallujah file to its proper place, a new determination settled over her. Whatever happened with her training assignment or her military career, she now understood that Blackwood represented something far more dangerous than mere prejudice. He represented a corruption of the very values the uniform stood for: honor, integrity, accountability. She would need to tread carefully. Blackwood had powerful allies and a demonstrated willingness to destroy those who stood in his way. But Amanda had inherited her father's sense of duty along with his marksmanship skills. Some targets couldn't be left unengaged regardless of the personal cost of taking the shot. As she slipped out of the archives room with a grateful nod to Master Sergeant Rivera, Amanda knew that the coming confrontation with General Blackwood would define not just her military career, but the kind of soldier, the kind of person she had chosen to be. The stage was set for a clash that would reverberate throughout Fort Benning and potentially the Army itself. A clash between power and principle, between authority and integrity. A clash that would begin at tomorrow morning's formal inspection with 500 soldiers standing at attention under the merciless Georgia sun. Dawn broke over Fort Benning with the crimson intensity that soldiers throughout the ages have recognized as nature's warning. Red sky at morning, sailors take warning. The air hung heavy with humidity, promising another brutal Georgia summer day that would test even the most seasoned troops standing in formation. Staff Sergeant Amanda Reeves watched the sunrise from the window of her barracks, already fully dressed in her Class A uniform, every brass button and insignia polished to a mirror finish. Sleep had evaded her after her discovery in the archives. The connection between Blackwood and her father's final mission, the covered-up civilian casualties in Fallujah, these revelations had circled in her mind like predators waiting for a moment of weakness. But Amanda had been trained to function without adequate rest. 8 years of military service had taught her that clarity came not from comfort, but from purpose. Her purpose today was twofold, complete. Her assigned duties with the professionalism expected of an elite soldier and protect Private First Class Sophie Miller from Blackwood's apparent vendetta against female combat personnel. The young private had too much potential to be sidelined because of an aging general's prejudice. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she called, turning from the window. The door opened to reveal Colonel Sullivan, already immaculately uniformed despite the early hour. His presence in the barracks was unusual enough to raise eyebrows, but the grave set of his weathered face suggested this wasn't a social call. "Staff Sergeant," he said without preamble, "I need 5 minutes of your time." "Of course, sir." Amanda gestured to the room's single chair while she remained standing. Sullivan closed the door before speaking, his voice low. "I received a call from Colonel Harrington last night. He informed me of General Blackwood's decision regarding your training assignment. News travels fast, sir. In the military, bad news always does." Sullivan's pale eyes studied her with uncomfortable intensity. "Harrington also mentioned that Blackwood made some pointed comments about your qualifications and the nature of your appointment." Amanda maintained her professional composure. "The general expressed concerns that standards might have been adjusted to accommodate female combat personnel, sir." Sullivan's expression hardened. "That's Blackwood's standard line. Been using it since the first women were admitted to the service academies." He paused, seeming to measure his next words carefully. "I understand you accessed the secure archives last night." The statement landed like a grenade in the small room. Amanda's expression remained neutral, but her mind raced through possible responses, weighing the risk of denial against the potential consequences of admission. "Military intelligence monitors all access to classified materials," Sullivan continued before she could respond. "Fortunately, in this case, that intelligence reports to me rather than General Blackwood." Relief washed through Amanda, quickly replaced by wariness. "May I ask how you knew what I was looking for, sir? Because it's exactly what I would have done in your position." Sullivan leaned forward, dropping his voice even lower. "You found the connection between Blackwood and your father's mission in al-Basra, I presume? And probably the Fallujah incident as well." Amanda nodded once, a barely perceptible movement. "Then you understand what you're dealing with," Sullivan said grimly. "Blackwood has been protected by powerful people throughout his career. People who believe military reputation supersedes accountability. People who think admitting mistakes undermines confidence in command. With respect, sir, allowing those who make fatal mistakes to advance to higher command seems more damaging to the institution." Sullivan's mouth twitched in what might have been approval. "You sound like your father." He sighed suddenly, looking every one of his 67 years. "James tried to push for a full investigation after al-Basra. He believed Blackwood had leaked operational details to curry favor with certain intelligence officers, information that ultimately reached the enemy." Amanda felt her chest tighten. "That would be treason." "It would be, if it could be proven." Sullivan's expression darkened. "But the evidence was circumstantial. Blackwood's connections in Washington ensured the investigation was shuttered before it really began. Your father was offered medical retirement and a chest full of medals to go away quietly." "But he couldn't live with it," Amanda said softly, the pieces of her childhood finally falling into place. "No, he couldn't." Sullivan straightened in his chair. "Now Blackwood sees you, James Reeves's daughter, rising through the ranks, exceeding every standard, embodying everything he claims women in combat roles can't be. Your very existence threatens his worldview. And you believe he'll use his authority to force me out. I believe William Blackwood never forgives and never forgets. He'll view you as both a threat and an opportunity, a chance to finish what he started with your father. Amanda processed this information with the same methodical precision she applied to calculating windage on a difficult shot. "Why are you telling me this, sir?" Sullivan stood adjusting his uniform with military precision. "Because you deserve to know what you're up against, and because I made a promise to your father that I intend to keep." He moved toward the door, then paused. "The formal inspection begins at 0800. Blackwood will be looking for any reason to find fault. Don't give him one son." "I never do, sir." After Sullivan departed, Amanda checked her watch. She had 45 minutes to gather her squad and ensure they were prepared for inspection. Whatever personal battle existed between her and Blackwood, she wouldn't allow it to reflect poorly on the soldiers under her command. With one final adjustment to her uniform, Staff Sergeant Amanda Reeves stepped into the corridor, her face composed into the mask of calm authority that had become second nature during 8 years of military service. The weight of her discoveries sat heavy on her shoulders, but her posture revealed nothing but the confident bearing of an elite soldier prepared for duty. The battle lines were drawn. The question now was who would fire the first shot. The parade ground at Fort Benning stretched before Amanda like a vast stage, its immaculate surface baking under the Georgia sun. 500 soldiers stood in precise formation, rank upon rank of young men and women in Class A uniforms, their bodies rigid with the special tension reserved for formal inspections. Amanda's squad occupied the third row of Alpha Company's formation directly in her line of sight from her position with the non-commissioned officers. She could see Private Miller standing at perfect attention, the young woman's uniform immaculate, despite Blackwood's impending scrutiny. Pride mingled with concern as Amanda noted the private's determined expression. Sophie Miller had the potential to become an exceptional soldier if given the chance. Amanda had recognized that potential immediately, the same natural talent for marksmanship that she herself had possessed at a young age, combined with an analytical mind that could calculate trajectories and environmental factors almost instinctively. Now that promising career hung in the balance because a general with outdated views had decided female soldiers belonged in support roles rather than combat positions. At precisely 0800, General Blackwood emerged from headquarters flanked by his executive officer and Fort Benning's senior enlisted advisor. The general's uniform was a testament to military precision. Every crease razor sharp, every brass fixture gleaming in the morning light, every ribbon and metal perfectly aligned. He moved with the deliberate pace of a man accustomed to others, waiting on his schedule, his eyes scanning the assembled troops with predatory focus. Colonel Sullivan stood to one side of the parade ground, his official role that of observer rather than participant. His presence sent a clear message to those who understood military politics. This inspection had higher visibility than usual. "Battalion, attention." The command sergeant major's voice cracked across the parade ground like a whip, though the troops were already standing perfectly still. Blackwood began his inspection with methodical precision, moving slowly down each row, occasionally stopping to examine a uniform more closely or question a soldier about their duties. His technique was classic military psychology: prolonged silence designed to make young recruits nervous, followed by abrupt, rapid-fire questions intended to fluster even well-prepared troops. Amanda observed with growing tension as Blackwood approached Alpha Company. His pattern thus far suggested he was looking for specific targets rather than conducting a genuine assessment of unit readiness. Twice already he had singled out female soldiers for particularly intense scrutiny, finding minute uniform infractions that would have gone unnoticed on their male counterparts. When Blackwood reached Private Miller's position, Amanda felt her muscles tense involuntarily. The general stopped directly in front of the young private, his eyes narrowing as he took in her appearance. "Private," Blackwood said, his voice pitched to carry to nearby troops. "Your name and duty assignment." "Private First Class Sophie Miller, sir. Advanced Marksmanship Training Program, Alpha Company." Blackwood's eyebrow rose a fraction. "The special program under Staff Sergeant Reeves." "Yes, sir." "Tell me, Private Miller, what was your marksmanship qualification score during basic training?" 36 out of 40, sir." "And you believe that qualifies you for specialized sniper training?" Blackwood's tone carried clear skepticism. "I follow my assignment orders, sir." Miller's response was textbook, neither argumentative nor apologetic. Blackwood circled the young private, slowly examining her uniform from all angles. Your left breast pocket is 1/16 of an inch out of alignment, Private. He stopped directly in front of her again. Do you consider such sloppiness acceptable for a supposed elite program? Miller maintained her position of attention, eyes fixed forward. No, sir. I will correct it immediately. You certainly will. Blackwood's voice hardened. This is exactly the kind of substandard attention to detail I've observed throughout this special program. One wonders if the same laxity extends to the marksmanship standards themselves. The implication was clear and deliberately public. Blackwood was suggesting that Amanda's training program was substandard, using a minor uniform infraction as evidence. Perhaps you can explain, Private Miller, what unique qualification you possess that merited your selection for advanced training, besides, of course, matching certain demographic priorities currently fashionable in Washington. The question was a trap. If Miller defended her qualifications, she could be accused of insubordination. If she remained silent, it would appear she had no defense against the general's insinuation. Before Miller could respond, Amanda made a decision that she knew might end her military career. She took 2 precise steps forward from her position in the NCO rank. Sir, permission to address the general's question regarding Private Miller's qualifications. A ripple of tension passed through the assembled troops. Breaking formation during inspection was a serious breach of protocol. Every soldier on the parade ground knew it, and every eye shifted momentarily toward the unexpected interruption. Blackwood turned slowly, his expression a mixture of surprise and something darker, almost satisfaction, as if Amanda had walked into a trap he'd been setting. Staff Sergeant Reeves, he said, her name sounding like an accusation in his mouth. You seem to have forgotten basic parade ground protocol. No, sir, I am aware of protocol, but I believe the general's assessment requires immediate factual clarification. Colonel Harrington, standing nearby, shot Amanda a warning look that she deliberately ignored. This moment transcended normal military hierarchy. It was about something more fundamental, the integrity of the institution itself. Very well, Staff Sergeant, Blackwood said, his voice dangerously soft. Clarify. Amanda kept her voice steady and professional. Private Miller achieved the highest night fire qualification score in the battalion last month. She also set a new record for the stress fire course, sir. Her selection for advanced training was based solely on demonstrated aptitude and performance metrics as documented in the monthly training reports submitted to command. Silence fell across the parade ground. 500 soldiers stood frozen in formation, witnessing something few had ever seen: a direct challenge to a general officer during formal inspection. Blackwood's face flushed with barely contained anger. Staff Sergeant Reeves, are you suggesting I am unaware of the training reports from my own command? No, sir, I'm providing context for your question regarding Private Miller's qualifications. Context. Blackwood's voice rose slightly. You're providing insubordination, Staff Sergeant. Return to your position immediately. Amanda remained where she stood. Sir, with respect, the combat readiness of our forces depends on selecting the most qualified personnel for specialized roles regardless of gender. Private Miller has earned her place in the program through demonstrated excellence. The confrontation had now escalated beyond a simple breach of parade ground etiquette. Every soldier present understood they were witnessing a fundamental clash between authority and principle, a moment that would reverberate through the chain of command long after the inspection concluded. Blackwood stepped away from Private Miller and moved directly in front of Amanda, close enough that she could see the individual pores on his flushed face. When he spoke, his voice was pitched for her ears alone. You are making a serious mistake, Reeves. One that will end your career, just like your father. The mention of her father confirmed everything Sullivan had implied. This was personal for Blackwood, a continuation of a conflict that had begun years before Amanda had even entered military service. Step back into formation. Now. Blackwood's order carried the full weight of his rank and position. Amanda met his gaze without flinching. Sir, I respectfully stand by my assessment of Private Miller's qualifications and her right to continue in the advanced training program. What happened next occurred so quickly that many observers later disagreed about the exact sequence of events. General Blackwood, his face contorted with a rage that had clearly been building for decades, reached out and grabbed Amanda's hair at the base of her regulation bun, yanking her head backward with enough force that several witnesses later reported hearing the tendons in her neck crack. "You insubordinate bitch," he hissed, the words audible only to those standing closest to the confrontation. For a heartbeat that seemed to stretch into eternity, 500 soldiers witnessed something unprecedented in modern military protocol: a general officer physically assaulting a non-commissioned officer during a formal inspection. The collective intake of breath was audible across the parade ground, a wave of shock that seemed to freeze time itself. Colonel Harrington took an instinctive step forward, then hesitated, the lifetime of military conditioning that demanded respect for rank, warring with the basic human impulse to intervene in an assault. Colonel Sullivan made no such calculation. The former SEAL commander began moving purposefully across the parade ground toward the confrontation, his weathered face set in grim determination. But it was Amanda's response that would become legendary in the barracks of Fort Benning and beyond. Despite the painful grip on her hair, despite the humiliation of being physically dominated before her peers and subordinates, despite the career-ending implications of what was unfolding, Staff Sergeant Amanda Reeves did not flinch. She did not struggle. She did not show fear. Instead, she smiled. It wasn't a smile of humor or even defiance. It was the calm, centered expression of a combat veteran who had faced death in a dozen different forms and recognized that this moment, however career-destroying, was not among them. It was the smile of a sniper who had found perfect clarity in the heartbeat before squeezing the trigger. Blackwood, clearly expecting resistance or fear, seemed momentarily confused by this response. His grip tightened reflexively, pulling Amanda's head further back until she was forced to look up at the cloudless Georgia sky. And still she smiled. When she spoke, her voice carried across the parade ground with crystal clarity, pitched to reach not just Blackwood, but every soldier witnessing this pivotal moment. "Sir, you can break my back. You can end my career. You can destroy everything I've worked for." Her voice remained steady despite the awkward angle of her neck. "But you will never break my spirit. And you will never touch another one of my soldiers while I still draw breath." Then, her voice dropping to ensure only Blackwood could hear, she added, "I know what happened in Al-Basra, General. And I know what really happened in Fallujah. Your secrets aren't as buried as you think." The effect of these words was immediate and profound. Blackwood's face, already flushed with anger, drained of color. His hand trembled visibly where it gripped Amanda's hair, his eyes widening with the sudden realization that this confrontation had implications far beyond a simple challenge to his authority. For a moment that stretched like piano wire ready to snap, no one on the parade ground moved. 500 soldiers, dozens of officers, even the ever-present Georgia birds, seemed to hold their collective breath, waiting to see how this unprecedented breach of military protocol would resolve. It was Sergeant First Class Williams who broke the paralysis. The massive NCO, a combat veteran with 3 tours in Afghanistan and a chest full of valor decorations, stepped deliberately out of formation. Without a word, without any overt gesture of aggression, he positioned himself directly behind Amanda, his 6'4" frame casting a shadow that encompassed both her and the general. Within seconds, others followed his lead. Staff Sergeant Martinez, Corporal Thompson, Private First Class Jackson. Soldiers from every unit on the base moved with quiet determination, forming a silent wall of solidarity behind their fellow soldier. They said nothing, made no threats. But their message was unmistakable. If Blackwood intended to destroy Amanda Reeves, he would have to go through all of them to do it. The standoff lasted an eternity, compressed into heartbeats. Blackwood's political mind visibly calculating the cost of fighting 500 witnesses to his abuse of power. His hand released Amanda's hair as if burned, and he stepped back, his face ashen with the realization that his reign of unchecked authority had just ended in the most public way possible. Amanda straightened slowly, her uniform disheveled, but her dignity intact. When she spoke again, her words carried the weight of every veteran who had ever served with honor, only to be betrayed by those they trusted to lead. "We serve our country with honor, sir. All of us deserve to be treated with the same respect we show the flag we follow into battle." Colonel Sullivan reached the scene, positioning himself subtly between Amanda and Blackwood. "General," he said, his voice carrying the authority of decades of distinguished service, "I believe this inspection has concluded." For a moment, it seemed Blackwood might challenge this assessment. But a quick survey of the situation, hundreds of witnesses, Sullivan's presence, the unmistakable solidarity of the troops, appeared to penetrate even his rage-clouded judgment. "This isn't over, Sullivan," he said quietly before turning to address Colonel Harrington in a voice deliberately pitched to restore some semblance of normal command. "Colonel, complete the inspection and have the full report on my desk by 1600 hours." With that, General Blackwood departed the parade ground, his back rigid with suppressed fury, his aides scrambling to keep pace with his rapid stride. As soon as the general was out of earshot, Colonel Harrington moved quickly to Amanda's side. "Staff Sergeant, are you all right?" "I'm fine, sir." Despite her words, Amanda was already feeling the physical effects of Blackwood's assault, a throbbing pain at the base of her skull where he had gripped her hair, and the beginning of what promised to be a spectacular headache. "Report to medical immediately," Harrington ordered, his voice low enough that only Amanda and Sullivan could hear. "Have them document everything, then meet me in my office," Sullivan added. "I'll accompany you, Staff Sergeant." As Amanda moved to comply, she caught the eye of Private Miller still standing at rigid attention in formation. The young soldier's expression contained a mixture of shock, gratitude, and something else, a new understanding of what it truly meant to lead. The walk to the medical facility was conducted in silence, Sullivan matching Amanda's pace with the easy stride of a man who had spent his life conforming to military precision. Only when they were inside the building, away from potential observers, did he speak. "That was either the bravest or the most foolhardy thing I've witnessed in 40 years of service, Staff Sergeant." Amanda met his gaze directly. "Which do you believe it was, sir?" Sullivan's weathered face creased in what might have been a smile under different circumstances. "I believe it was necessary, which doesn't preclude it from being both brave and foolhardy." The medical examination was brief but thorough. The base physician documented mild soft tissue damage to Amanda's neck and scalp, took photographs of the visible redness where Blackwood had gripped her hair, and wrote detailed notes about the incident based on Amanda's matter-of-fact description. "This is Assault Staff Sergeant," the doctor said as he completed his report. "In any context outside military ranks, it would result in criminal charges." "I'm aware, sir," Amanda replied neutrally. "Well, I'm required to submit this report up the medical chain of command, independent of the regular command structure." The doctor's expression was carefully professional, but his eyes conveyed clear support. "For what it's worth, the entire medical staff witnessed what happened from our office windows overlooking the parade ground. You won't lack for corroboration." As they departed the medical facility, Sullivan checked his watch. "Colonel Harrington will be waiting, and I imagine the JAG office is already preparing for the inevitable investigation." The Judge Advocate General's office, the military's internal legal system, would indeed have to address both Blackwood's assault and Amanda's technical insubordination. The military lived and died by its adherence to clear chains of command. Despite the righteousness of her position, Amanda had violated those chains in a very public way. Colonel Harrington's office was a study in controlled chaos when they arrived. The colonel was on the phone, his expression grim, as he listened to someone on the other end. Two representatives from the JAG office were already present reviewing documents at the conference table. And somewhat surprisingly, Master Sergeant Rivera from the security office sat in a corner, his face unreadable. Harrington concluded his call and gestured for Amanda and Sullivan to enter. "Close the door," he instructed. Once they had complied, he continued. "That was the base commander. General Blackwood has already initiated proceedings to have you court-martialed for insubordination. Staff Sergeant." Amanda had expected as much. "I understand, sir. Do you, Harrington's tone was not unkind, but carried the weariness of a career officer watching a promising subordinate potentially throw away everything they'd worked for. A court-martial for insubordination could result in discharge, possibly even confinement, depending on how it's charged," Colonel Sullivan interjected. "Given the circumstances, particularly the physical assault witnessed by hundreds of personnel, surely the balance of consequences should fall on General Blackwood." Harrington sighed. "In a perfect world, perhaps, but you both know how this system works. Blackwood has connections in Washington that go back decades. He's already spinning this as a necessary response to a direct challenge to command authority during a formal inspection. He assaulted a non-commissioned officer in front of 500 witnesses," Sullivan said, his voice hardening, "and he'll claim it was a measured response to prevent a breakdown in discipline." Harrington looked genuinely troubled. "I've already received calls from 3 different generals asking what the hell happened. The narrative is being established as we speak." Amanda listened to this exchange with a growing sense of clarity. The system was preparing to close ranks around Blackwood, just as it had after al-Basra and Fallujah. The instinct to protect command authority, even when that authority was abused, ran deep in military culture. But something had changed today. Something fundamental in the relationship between those who gave orders and those who carried them out. "Sir," she said, addressing Colonel Harrington directly, "what happened on that parade ground wasn't just about General Blackwood and me. It was about every soldier who has ever been forced to choose between following orders and doing what's right." Harrington studied her with an unreadable expression. "That's a dangerous line of reasoning in a military context, Staff Sergeant." "It's the only line that matters, sir." Amanda stood straighter, ignoring the pain in her neck. "We take an oath to support and defend the Constitution, not to enable toxic leadership that undermines the very values we claim to protect." The room fell silent as her words hung in the air. Even the JAG officers had paused in their document review to listen. It was Master Sergeant Rivera who finally broke the silence. "Colonel, permission to speak freely." Harrington nodded, seeming almost relieved at the interruption. "Sir, I oversee the security systems for the base, including the archive room that Staff Sergeant Reeves visited last night." Rivera's calm statement caused the JAG officers to exchange glances. "What's relevant is that I also maintain the security camera system for the parade ground." He reached into his pocket and produced a small digital storage device. "This contains unedited footage from 3 different angles of this morning's incident. I've already secured the original recordings in accordance with evidence preservation protocols." The implication was clear. Whatever narrative Blackwood attempted to establish, video evidence would contradict it. Harrington accepted the device with a thoughtful expression. "This changes the dynamic somewhat." "There's more, sir." Rivera hesitated, glancing at Amanda. "While reviewing the security logs this morning, I discovered that General Blackwood accessed the same archive files as Staff Sergeant Reeves, but approximately 30 minutes later. He spent considerable time with the Fallujah incident report." Sullivan's eyes narrowed. "He knows what she found." "It appears so, sir." Amanda processed this information with the tactical assessment skills honed through years of combat operations. "He'll try to bury it again, or discredit me before I can bring it forward. Which is precisely why we need to move quickly," Sullivan said, turning to Harrington. "Colonel, I recommend we immediately initiate a formal complaint regarding General Blackwood's conduct backed by the medical report, witness statements, and security footage." Harrington nodded slowly. "I agree. But we need to be prepared for significant blowback. Blackwood won't go down without a fight, and he has allies in positions that could make life very difficult for everyone in this room." "With respect, sir," Amanda said, "he made this about more than just me when he assaulted a soldier in front of the entire base. Every person who witnessed that incident is now questioning whether the chain of command truly upholds the values we're sworn to defend." The colonel considered this for a long moment before turning to the JAG officers. "Prepare the formal complaint, include all available evidence, and establish a secure channel for witness statements. I suspect we'll have quite a few." As the meeting concluded and assignments were distributed, Amanda found herself momentarily alone with Colonel Sullivan in the corridor outside. "This won't be easy," Sullivan said quietly. "Blackwood will use every resource at his disposal to discredit you and anyone who supports you. He's fighting for his career now, possibly even his freedom if the Fallujah cover-up is fully exposed." Amanda nodded, wincing slightly at the pain the movement caused. "I know, sir, but some fights can't be avoided regardless of the cost. Your father said something very similar before he testified about al-Basra," Sullivan remarked. "The system broke him for his honesty. Are you prepared for that possibility?" Amanda considered the question with the same deliberate care she would give to calculating a difficult shot. "My father fought alone, sir. I don't believe I will." As if to underscore her point, the corridor door opened to reveal Sergeant First Class Williams, Staff Sergeant Martinez, and a dozen other non-commissioned officers from various units across the base. Williams stepped forward, his massive frame seeming to fill the corridor. "Staff Sergeant Reeves, we heard you might need some witnesses for your statement." Behind them, more soldiers appeared, including Private Miller, still in her inspection uniform. Amanda felt something tighten in her chest, not fear or pain, but a profound recognition of what these soldiers were risking by standing with her. Every one of them understood that opposing Blackwood could have serious career implications. Yet here they were, embodying the very values that the general had betrayed. As she looked at their determined faces, Amanda knew with absolute certainty that regardless of what happened next, whether she faced court-martial, whether Blackwood escaped justice yet again, whether her military career ended today or continued for decades, she had made the right choice on that parade ground. Some lines could not be uncrossed. Some moments demanded choosing between safety and what was right. And in those moments, the true measure of a soldier, of a human being, was revealed not in the ribbons on their chest or the rank on their collar, but in their willingness to stand for something greater than themselves, regardless of the personal cost. The battle lines had been drawn, the first shots fired. Now the true test of courage would begin. The Judge Advocate General's office at Fort Benning resembled a war room in the aftermath of the parade ground confrontation. Phones rang constantly, emails flooded inboxes, and military lawyers moved with purposeful urgency between conference rooms. At the center of this controlled chaos sat Staff Sergeant Amanda Reeves, her Class A uniform still impeccable. Despite the morning's events, her expression calm as she provided her third official statement of the day. Please describe once more the exact sequence of events that led to General Blackwood's physical contact. Requested Captain Sarah Jensen, the JAG officer assigned to document Amanda's complaint. Amanda recounted the details with precision, neither embellishing nor minimizing the confrontation. Her training as a sniper had instilled in her the importance of accurate observation and reporting skills that now served her in this legal battlefield. And you claim that prior to the physical altercation, General Blackwood made reference to your father? Captain Jensen asked, her pen poised above her legal pad. Yes, ma'am, he stated. You are making a serious mistake, Reeves, one that will end your career, just like your father. Jensen made a note, her expression thoughtful. That suggests prior knowledge of your family history and a potentially personal motivation for his actions. It aligns with information I recently discovered regarding a connection between General Blackwood and my father during Operation Desert Storm, Amanda confirmed. You're referring to the classified mission documents you accessed last night. Jensen's tone was carefully neutral, but her eyes reflected professional concern. Accessing classified material for personal reasons could complicate your case, Staff Sergeant. Before Amanda could respond, the office door opened to admit Colonel Sullivan. The older officer nodded to Captain Jensen before addressing Amanda. Staff Sergeant, I've just come from a meeting with the base commander. He's convened an emergency command staff meeting to address this morning's incident. Sullivan's weathered face revealed nothing of his thoughts. General Blackwood will be present, as will representatives from the Pentagon via secure video conference. The implications were clear. This had already escalated beyond a local command issue to something drawing attention from the highest levels of military leadership. I've also been informed, Sullivan continued, that your presence is requested, as is mine. Captain Jensen looked up sharply. That's highly irregular, Colonel. Staff Sergeant Reeves is the complainant in an active investigation. She shouldn't be placed in direct contact with the subject of that complaint until the preliminary findings are established. I made that very point, Captain, Sullivan replied. I was overruled. Apparently, several senior officers at the Pentagon have taken a personal interest in this situation. They want to hear directly from all parties involved. Amanda processed this information with the same tactical assessment she would apply to an evolving battlefield situation. When is this meeting scheduled, sir? 1600 hours. That gives us just over 3 hours to prepare. Sullivan turned to Captain Jensen. I suggest you accompany us, Captain. Your legal expertise may prove valuable. As Jensen gathered her materials, Sullivan moved closer to Amanda and lowered his voice. This is moving faster than I anticipated. Blackwood must have activated every connection in his network. Or someone at the Pentagon recognized the broader implications, Amanda suggested. Sullivan nodded thoughtfully. Either way, we need to be prepared for anything. Blackwood won't go down without a fight, and he'll have allies in that room. And enemies, Amanda added. A man like Blackwood doesn't rise through the ranks without creating both. A ghost of a smile crossed Sullivan's face. You think like your father. The comparison contained both approval and warning. James Reeves's strategic mind had made him a legendary operator, but his unwavering principles had ultimately cost him his career. As they exited the JAG office, Amanda was struck by the changed atmosphere on the base. Word of the morning's confrontation had spread with the efficiency only possible in military environments. Soldiers who passed her in the quarters no longer offered merely the customary salutes and, "Good afternoon, Staff Sergeant." Now their eyes held something deeper respect mingled with curiosity and, in many cases, unmistakable support. Outside the headquarters building, Amanda was surprised to find Private Sophie Miller waiting still in her Class A uniform. "Private," Amanda acknowledged, keeping her tone professional despite the unexpected appearance. "Staff Sergeant," Miller replied, executing a perfect salute. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am." "Granted, but make it quick. I have a command meeting to prepare for." Miller squared her shoulders, her young face set with determination. "I wanted to thank you, ma'am, for what you did this morning." She hesitated, then continued with rush of words. "And to tell you that 15 other female soldiers have already submitted written statements about previous incidents with General Blackwood. Incidents they were afraid to report until today." Amanda maintained her composure, but the information landed with significance. 15 statements meant this wasn't an isolated incident. It suggested a pattern of behavior that would be much harder for the command structure to dismiss. "Thank you for the information, Private. Now return to your duties." "Yes, ma'am." Miller saluted again, then added quietly, "We're all behind you, Staff Sergeant, whatever happens." As Miller departed, Sullivan watched with a thoughtful expression. The ripple effects have already begun. Blackwood's behavior has apparently been an open secret among the female personnel. Just like my father's mission in al-Basra and the civilian casualties in Fallujah were open secrets in their respective circles, Amanda observed. The military excels at maintaining secrets, while simultaneously ensuring everyone who needs to know does. "A paradox that has defined my entire career," Sullivan agreed. The 3 hours before the command meeting passed in a blur of preparation. Amanda reviewed her statements for consistency, discussed strategy with Sullivan and Jensen, and finally took 30 minutes to center herself using the same mental techniques she employed before difficult sniper operations. At 15:55 hours, Amanda stood outside the main conference room in headquarters. Her uniform freshly adjusted, her mind clear and focused. Whatever happened in the next hour would likely determine not just her military future, but potentially the direction of her life beyond service. "Ready, Staff Sergeant?" Sullivan asked as he approached his own uniform, bearing the full weight of his decades of distinguished service rows of ribbons that told the story of America's military engagements from the Cold War forward. "Ready, sir?" Amanda replied with the same certainty she would express before confirming a target. The conference room fell silent as they entered. Around the massive oak table sat the assembled command staff of Fort Benning colonels, lieutenant colonels, and senior non-commissioned officers representing every major division on the base. At the head of the table, Brigadier General William Blackwood sat with rigid posture, his face an unreadable mask of professional composure. The wall-mounted screens displayed the serious faces of 3 major generals and a lieutenant general from the Pentagon, their expressions suggesting they had already been briefed on the situation. Base Commander Major General Howard gestured to the 2 empty seats near the center of the table. "Colonel Sullivan, Staff Sergeant Reeves, please be seated. Captain Jensen, you may take the observer position along the wall." As Amanda took her seat, she noted the subtle dynamics in the room. Several of the officers avoided making eye contact with her, suggesting they had already aligned themselves with Blackwood's position. Others, however, met her gaze directly, their expressions neutral, but not hostile. The battle lines were being drawn with the silent efficiency of veteran tacticians. "Gentlemen and lady," General Howard began, acknowledging Amanda with a slight nod. "We are convened to address the incident that occurred during this morning's formal inspection. The facts as currently understood involve a confrontation between Brigadier General Blackwood and Staff Sergeant Reeves that escalated to physical contact and potential violations of military protocol on both sides." Howard turned to the video screens. "Lieutenant General Parker has joined us from the Pentagon, along with Generals Martinez, Coleman, and Westfield, to provide oversight as we determine the appropriate course of action." Lieutenant General Parker, a woman in her late 50s with short silver hair and piercing eyes, leaned forward slightly. "Before we proceed, I want to be absolutely clear about the gravity of this situation. What occurred this morning has implications that extend far beyond Fort Benning. Videos of the confrontation recorded on personal devices are already circulating among military personnel nationwide. We have a significant PR situation developing, particularly regarding the treatment of female combat personnel." The room tensed at this revelation. Military discipline typically prevented such incidents from being documented unofficially, but in an era of ubiquitous smartphones, even the strict protocols of a formal inspection couldn't prevent someone from discreetly recording a moment of such unprecedented drama. General Howard nodded grimly. We'll address the security breach regarding unauthorized recording separately. For now, let's focus on the core incident. He turned to Blackwood. General, would you please provide your account of the events? Blackwood straightened, his voice steady and authoritative. Certainly. During routine inspection, I identified several deficiencies in Private Miller's uniform presentation. When I questioned her qualifications for the Advanced Marksmanship Program, Staff Sergeant Reeves broke formation to challenge my assessment, directly undermining command authority in front of 500 troops. He paused, his expression hardening. When I ordered her to return to formation, she refused a direct order. At that point, I took necessary action to restore discipline in what was becoming a volatile situation that threatened to undermine the entire command structure of the base. By necessary action, you're referring to physically grabbing Staff Sergeant Reeves by the hair, Lieutenant General Parker asked from the video screen, her tone neutral but pointed. Blackwood's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I used the minimum force required to restore order in a rapidly deteriorating situation. Staff Sergeant Reeves had already demonstrated her unwillingness to comply with verbal orders. General Howard turned to Amanda. Staff Sergeant Reeves, your account. Amanda spoke with the measured precision that characterized all her professional interactions. During inspection, General Blackwood questioned Private Miller's qualifications for the Advanced Marksmanship Program in a manner that implied she had been selected based on gender rather than merit. As her commanding officer and the head of the program, I stepped forward to provide factual clarification regarding her exemplary performance metrics. She continued without emotion, simply stating facts. When General Blackwood ordered me to return to formation, I acknowledged that I was providing relevant performance data that might not have been included in his briefing materials. At that point, General Blackwood approached me, made a personal reference to my father's military career, and then physically grabbed me by the hair with enough force to cause the injuries documented in the medical report. You admit to disobeying a direct order to return to formation, asked one of the colonels, his tone suggesting he had already reached his conclusion about the incident. I acknowledge that I remained in place to complete providing relevant information about a soldier under my command who was being unfairly assessed, Amanda replied evenly. Colonel Sullivan spoke for the first time. If I may, the question itself presupposes that military protocol is absolute rather than contextual. There are numerous precedents for situations where strict adherence to protocol is superseded by other military values, such as the obligation to prevent miscarriages of justice or protect personnel under one's command. Lieutenant General Parker nodded. Well put, Colonel Sullivan. The military is not a mindless hierarchy, but a values-based institution, which brings us to a critical question. She focused her attention on Blackwood. General, can you explain why, by multiple accounts, you reference his Staff Sergeant Reeves's father during this confrontation? That suggests a personal element that goes beyond a simple matter of inspection protocol. The question hit with the precision of a guided munition. Blackwood's expression flickered momentarily before he regained his composure. I made a general reference to the importance of respecting chain of command, using her father's career as a relevant example of the consequences of insubordination. Amanda felt a surge of controlled anger at this mischaracterization of her father's service, but her face revealed nothing. Sullivan, however, leaned forward. That's a remarkable claim, General Blackwood, considering that Colonel James Reeves received the Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars with Valor, and a Purple Heart before his medical retirement. His personnel file contains nothing but commendations until the classified incident in Al-Basra, an operation in which you played a peripheral but significant role. The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees as Sullivan's words landed. Several of the officers exchanged glances, clearly unaware of this connection. Colonel Sullivan, General Howard warned, we are addressing today's incident, not historical operations. With respect, sir, Sullivan countered. I believe they are directly connected. Staff Sergeant Reeves accessed classified files last night regarding both the Al-Basra operation and the 2004 Fallujah incident files that General Blackwood also accessed shortly afterward. I submit that this morning's confrontation was motivated by General Blackwood's concern about those documents becoming more widely known. The revelation sent a ripple of tension through the room. Blackwood's face had gone rigid, his knuckles white where they rested on the table. Lieutenant General Parker's voice cut through the tension. What exactly are these documents, Colonel Sullivan? And why would they be relevant to today's incident? Sullivan met Blackwood's gaze directly. The Al-Basra documents suggest that then-Captain Blackwood may have compromised a Special Forces operation led by Colonel Reeves and myself, resulting in significant casualties. The Fallujah documents indicate that Colonel Blackwood authorized an airstrike on what intelligence had identified as an insurgent location, despite late arriving intelligence, suggesting it was a civilian target. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. 16 Iraqi civilians died in that strike, including 9 children. The subsequent investigation was redirected to place blame on a deceased lieutenant who couldn't defend himself, while Blackwood received his first general's star shortly thereafter. The silence that followed was absolute. Even through the video feed, the Pentagon general's shock was palpable. Blackwood finally broke the silence, his voice tight with controlled fury. These are classified matters being inappropriately discussed in a forum addressing a simple disciplinary issue. Colonel Sullivan is attempting to deflect attention from Staff Sergeant Reeves's clear insubordination by dredging up operations that have been fully investigated and closed. Closed but not resolved, Amanda said quietly, speaking for the first time since her initial statement. Just as you attempted to close the matter of Private Miller's qualifications by dismissing her based on gender rather than performance. She turned to address the room at large, her voice steady. What happened this morning wasn't about inspection protocol or chain of command. It was about the fundamental values of our military integrity, accountability, and the obligation to stand up for what's right, even when doing so carries personal risk. Her gaze returned to Blackwood. My father taught me that the most important duty of a soldier isn't blind obedience, but moral courage. He paid a heavy price for that belief when he questioned the circumstances of the Al-Basra mission. I was prepared to pay the same price this morning. The room fell silent again as her words resonated with the assembled officers. Military leadership had always balanced the tension between discipline and moral authority, between following orders and doing what's right. Every person in that room had at some point in their career confronted that delicate balance. Lieutenant General Parker broke the silence. I believe we need to expand the scope of this inquiry. Major General Howard, I'm dispatching a team from the Pentagon's Inspector General's office to review both the current incident and the historical matters raised by Colonel Sullivan. Until their investigation is complete, I recommend that both General Blackwood and Staff Sergeant Reeves be placed on administrative leave. Blackwood surged to his feet. This is outrageous. You're allowing a staff sergeant's insubordination to trigger an investigation into matters that were resolved decades ago. Sit down, General. Parker commanded, her voice carrying the full authority of her rank and position. When Blackwood reluctantly complied, she continued, Nothing is ever truly resolved if it was handled unjustly the first time. The integrity of our institution demands that we address these allegations thoroughly regardless of who they implicate or how long ago they occurred. The meeting concluded shortly thereafter with General Howard issuing formal administrative leave orders to both Blackwood and Amanda, effective immediately. As the room cleared, Amanda found herself standing alone with Sullivan and Captain Jensen. That went better than expected, Jensen observed quietly. Sullivan's expression was cautious. It's only beginning. Blackwood still has powerful allies and investigations can be steered in many directions. But the videos are already circulating, Jensen pointed out. The public nature of the confrontation makes it harder to bury. True, Sullivan acknowledged, but never underestimate the military's ability to manage information when sufficiently motivated. Amanda listened to this exchange with the detached analysis she applied to complex tactical situations. What matters now isn't just the investigation, but how the troops perceive its handling. 500 soldiers witnessed what happened this morning. They'll be watching to see whether the system delivers justice or protects power. Sullivan studied her with newfound respect. You understand the bigger picture, just like your father. This time the comparison contained no warning, only approval. As they exited the conference room, Amanda was surprised to find the corridor lined with soldiers, officers, and enlisted personnel from various units across the base, all standing at a respectful distance, but clearly there to witness her emergence from the meeting. Their presence sent a clear message. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It had become something larger, touching on values fundamental to the institution they all served. Among them stood Private Miller, her young face set with determination. Beside her was Sergeant First Class Williams, his massive frame and combat-decorated uniform, a stark contrast to the diminutive private, yet both united in purpose. The next 2 weeks unfolded with the methodical precision typical of military investigations, yet atypical in their scope and intensity. A team of investigators from the Pentagon descended on Fort Benning, conducting interviews with everyone from the most senior officers to the newest recruits. The classified files regarding al-Basra and Fallujah were retrieved from secure archives and subjected to fresh analysis. Amanda spent most of this period in a curious limbo. Technically on administrative leave, she was neither actively serving nor accused of any specific violation. She used the time to prepare methodically for whatever outcome might emerge, while also reconnecting with her father through long phone calls that gradually broke through the emotional walls he had built over decades. "You did what I couldn't," James Reeves told her during one such call, his voice carrying the weight of years of regret. "You stood your ground, publicly forced them to confront the truth." "I had advantages you didn't," Amanda replied. "Different times, different attitudes toward questioning authority." "Different courage too," her father said softly. "I testified behind closed doors, filed my concerns through proper channels. You stood up in front of 500 witnesses." The conversation paused, heavy with unspoken emotions that military families often struggle to articulate. "Dad," Amanda finally said, "I need you to come to Fort Benning." "Amanda, I haven't set foot on a military base in 15 years. "I know, but this isn't just about my situation anymore. It's about finally setting right what happened in al-Basra. They're reopening the entire investigation, and your testimony could be crucial." The silence that followed lasted so long that Amanda wondered if the connection had been lost. Finally, her father's voice returned, somehow both fragile and resolute. "I'll be there. Just tell me when." 3 days later, Colonel James Reeves arrived at Fort Benning, the base he had visited countless times during his distinguished career, but had avoided since his medical retirement. Despite 15 years of civilian life, he still moved with military precision, his posture and bearing instantly identifying him as a former commander, even to those who didn't recognize his name. Amanda met him at the visitor center, both of them momentarily awkward in this collision of their personal and professional worlds. Then James Reeves did something he had rarely done since Amanda's childhood. He embraced his daughter, holding her with the fierce protectiveness that had always defined his love, even when PTSD had made it difficult for him to express. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. "Prouder than I've ever been of anything in my life." The formal hearing began the following day in Fort Benning's main conferences center, a space large enough to accommodate the expanded scope of the investigation. The proceedings had been classified as an official military inquiry rather than a court-martial, a distinction that allowed for a broader examination of interconnected events spanning decades. The investigative panel consisted of 2 generals and a civilian legal expert from the Department of Defense, none of whom had any prior connection to Blackwood Sullivan or the Reeves family. Their mandate was to establish the facts regarding 3 separate but potentially connected matters: the al-Basra operation in 1991, the Fallujah airstrike in 2004, and the recent confrontation on the parade ground. General Blackwood arrived with a team of military lawyers in the confident bearing of a man who had navigated similar challenges throughout his career. His opening statement portrayed him as a dedicated officer upholding traditional military values against a changing culture that prioritized social engineering over combat effectiveness. "My actions on the parade ground, while perhaps more forceful than ideal, were necessary to maintain the discipline upon which military effectiveness depends," he concluded. "Any attempt to connect that incident to historical operations is a transparent effort to distract from the core issue of Staff Sergeant Reeves's insubordination." When Amanda's turn came to address the panel, she spoke not from prepared notes, but from the centered clarity that had defined her military service. "This case is fundamentally about accountability," she began. "Not just General Blackwood's accountability for his actions toward me, but the broader question of whether rank and political connections should shield anyone from responsibility for their decisions." She outlined the connection between the 3 incidents with the precision of a tactical briefing, explaining how each represented a moment when power had been allowed to override principle, when career advancement had taken precedence, over moral responsibility. What happened on that parade ground was merely the visible culmination of a pattern that began long before I entered military service, she concluded. I stand before you not seeking personal vindication, but asking for the system I have sworn to serve to demonstrate that its values are more than words on a recruitment poster. As the hearing progressed through its second day, Colonel James Reeves took the stand. His testimony about the Al-Basra mission, delivered with the calm precision that had once made him a legendary special operations commander, provided the missing context that classified documents alone couldn't convey. He described how intelligence about their insertion point had somehow reached enemy forces, resulting in an ambush that killed nearly half his team. He detailed the evidence suggesting that then-Captain Blackwood, serving as liaison with Iraqi intelligence assets, had leaked operational details either through carelessness or in an attempt to curry favor with certain intelligence officers. The subsequent investigation was shut down before it could establish definitive proof, James explained, but the pattern of information flow left little doubt among those of us who survived the ambush. When cross-examined by Blackwood's legal team, James remained unshakable, his responses measured but resolute. The years of isolation had not dulled his tactical mind or his commitment to the truth. The most dramatic moment came during the third day, when a surprise witness appeared. Former Lieutenant Sarah Blackwood, the general's daughter, who had resigned her commission 2 years earlier after serving under her father's indirect command in Germany. Her testimony, delivered with obvious reluctance but clear conviction, detailed a pattern of behavior extending far beyond the incidents under investigation: a consistent dismissal of female officers' capabilities, manipulation of performance reviews to limit women's advancement, and occasional physical intimidation disguised as old-school discipline. I resigned not because I lacked commitment to military service, she concluded, her voice steady despite the obvious emotional cost of testifying against her father, but because I couldn't reconcile the values I swore to uphold with the reality I experienced under his command. The hearing room fell silent as her words hung in the air, their impact magnified by the personal connection between witness and subject. General Blackwood sat rigid in his chair, his expression unreadable, but his complexion ashen. By the fourth day, the momentum had shifted decisively. Additional witnesses came forward with accounts of Blackwood's behavior toward female personnel. A former intelligence officer provided new details about the Fallujah airstrike, confirming that Blackwood had received updated intelligence identifying the target as a civilian location, but had proceeded with the strike regardless. Most significantly, a retired general testifying via secure video conference and acknowledged his role in protecting Blackwood after both incidents, describing a different era when preserving the military's public image often took precedence over addressing internal failures. I believed I was acting in the institution's best interest, the retired general admitted. I now recognize that such decisions, however well-intentioned, ultimately undermined the very values we sought to protect. As the hearing neared its conclusion, Amanda found herself sitting alone in the base chapel, seeking a moment of quiet reflection before the final session. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of statements, testimonies, and legal consultations, leaving little time for processing the personal impact of these events. The chapel door opened quietly to admit Colonel Sullivan, his expression suggesting he carried significant news. "They've reached their decision," he said without preamble. "The panel will announce it at 1400 hours. Amanda nodded, maintaining the composure that had become second nature. "Have there been any indications?" "Nothing official," Sullivan replied, taking a seat beside her. "But the base commander just received orders to prepare for a change of command ceremony next week. Read into that what you will." The implications were clear. Blackwood would not be returning to his position regardless of the panel's specific findings. "What about you?" Sullivan asked. "Are you prepared for all possible outcomes?" Amanda considered the question carefully. "I made peace with the potential consequences the moment I stepped out of formation. What matters isn't what happens to my career, but whether the system demonstrates that accountability applies at all levels." Sullivan studied her with the evaluating gaze that had assessed countless operators throughout his storied career. "You know, I originally promised your father I'd look out for you. Somewhere along the way, I realized you were looking out for all of us," he said, reminding an imperfect institution of its perfect ideals. The panel's final ruling, delivered with the formal language typical of military proceedings, represented what many would later describe as a watershed moment in military accountability. General Blackwood was relieved of command and referred for administrative separation from service, a career-ending sanction one step short of court-martial. The findings specifically cited conduct unbecoming an officer and failure to maintain the high ethical standards expected of senior leadership. More significantly, the panel ordered a comprehensive review of all decisions made under Blackwood's command regarding female personnel with specific attention to promotion recommendations and assignment selections that may have been influenced by gender bias. Regarding Amanda, the panel acknowledged her technical violation of inspection protocol while recognizing the exceptional circumstances that prompted her actions. She would receive a formal reprimand for breaking formation, a minimal consequence that would not impede her career progression, along with a transfer to Fort Benning's Advanced Tactical Training Division, where her combat experience and demonstrated leadership would serve the next generation of soldiers. As for the historical incidents, the panel recommended that both the al-Basra and Fallujah operations be subject to full unredacted review by an independent commission, with findings to be made public as to the extent security considerations allowed. This isn't just about addressing past wrongs, the panel's senior member stated in his closing remarks. It's about ensuring our institution learns from them. The strength of our military has never rested solely on our weapons or tactics, but on the moral foundation that distinguishes us from those we fight. 1 week later, Amanda stood on the same parade ground where the confrontation had occurred, now part of the formation, observing the change of command ceremony as General Blackwood's replacement, a combat-decorated female general with a reputation for uncompromising integrity, assumed leadership of Fort Benning's training divisions. Beside Amanda stood Private Sophie Miller, recently promoted to Private First Class after setting a new base record in the Advanced Marksmanship Qualification course. Her young face reflected the solemnity appropriate to the ceremony, but her eyes carried a new confidence, the look of someone who had witnessed the system working as it should, however imperfectly and belatedly. In the VIP section, Colonel James Reeves sat in his dress uniform for the first time in 15 years, the rows of decorations on his chest telling the story of a lifetime of service. Beside him, Colonel Sullivan watched the proceedings with the measured satisfaction of a man who had seen the long arc of military justice finally bend toward its proper conclusion. After the ceremony, as the formations dispersed and the crowd thinned, Amanda found herself approached by the newly installed general. "Staff Sergeant Reeves," the general acknowledged. "I've reviewed your file extensively. Impressive record." "Thank you, ma'am. I understand you're scheduled to begin instructor duties with the Tactical Training Division next week." "Yes, ma'am. Looking forward to it." The general studied her with evaluating eyes that had assessed thousands of soldiers throughout a distinguished career. "Good. We need instructors who understand that being a soldier means more than following orders. It means standing for something greater than oneself." She paused, then added, "though perhaps with slightly less dramatic methods in the future." "Understood, ma'am." Amanda allowed herself the briefest smile. As the general moved on to greet other officers, Amanda gazed across the parade ground where hundreds of soldiers continued their daily duties, training, preparing, serving. Many were women who now had a clearer path forward because of what had happened here. Many were men who had witnessed firsthand that moral courage sometimes requires standing apart from formation. In that moment, Staff Sergeant Amanda Reeves understood that what had begun as a personal confrontation had transformed into something far more significant, a reminder that institutions are ultimately defined not by their regulations or traditions, but by the courage of those willing to defend their highest values even against threats from within. The afternoon sun glinted off her insignia as she turned toward her next assignment, ready to share that understanding with the next generation of American soldiers.